Hello everyone, Professor Kurzlik here. So I wanted to make a video about something that oftentimes, or at least sometimes, feels abstract or confusing to students, and that's the use of theory for political science. Um, when people hear the word theory, they sometimes think it means maybe guessing or speculation or even an opinion. But in political science, theory means something quite different. Theory is how we explain patterns in politics. It's how we move from simply describing events to understanding why they happen. So think about something major in American history, like the civil rights movement that we've been talking about in some of my classes. We can describe what happened: protests, marches, new laws, expanding voting rights. Those are historical facts. But political science doesn't stop at simply describing events. Political science asks a deeper question. It asks why this happened, maybe why this happened when it did for the civil rights movement, the pieces that we're reading. So for our study of my Power in America class, why did mass protest emerge at that time when it did? Why did the government finally respond and pass legislation? Why did change occur after decades of inequality? Those why questions are where theory really comes in. Theory gives us frameworks for explaining political outcomes. Without theory, we're really just telling stories, which are important. It's important to know what happens in the civil rights movement. It's important to know how these events occurred, but theory helps us make sense of maybe why they emerged when they did. So with theory, we're really identifying causes. So in political science, theory helps us to do several important things. First, theory helps us explain outcomes. Instead of simply saying that something happened, theory asks what conditions made that outcome possible and what forces pushed events in that direction. So theory helps us identify patterns, such as when governments are more likely to respond to, again, we can use protests as an example from my Power in America course, when social movements tend to succeed or when they fail, and when political institutions become vulnerable to outside pressure. So theory allows us to move beyond simply describing what has happened and towards more of an explanation of why that thing happened. So second, theory helps us see connections across different cases. Political scientists don't just study one election. Like we do, we have our case studies, but oftentimes our studies will be broader. So maybe looking beyond one election, one protest, or in a comparative politics course, oftentimes beyond one country. We want to know whether similar dynamics appear elsewhere. Do protests succeed more often when political elites are divided? Do reforms tend to occur during periods of economic change? Do governments respond differently when instability threatens legitimacy? Theory allows us to compare across time and space. It lets us take lessons from one case and apply them to others. So without theory, every event stands alone. With theory, events become part of a larger pattern. So third, theory helps us understand power. Power in politics isn't just about who holds power, it's about who influences decisions, who sets agendas, who gets heard, who gets ignored, and when change becomes possible. So theory helps us see that power doesn't operate only through formal institutions like Congress or through the presidency, the executive branch. It also flows through economic structures, electoral incentives, social movements, public opinion, elite coalitions, and moments of crises. So theory gives us tools to understand how ordinary people sometimes gain leverage over powerful systems and why that leverage disappears at other times. So another way to think about theory is that it turns events into puzzles. Instead of saying that a policy changed, political scientists ask why it changed then and not earlier. Instead of treating outcomes as inevitable, political scientists treat them as things that require explanation. So, theory also helps us avoid overly simple answers. It's tempting to say that change happens because people are brave or because leaders are charismatic. Those things do matter. Those things matter in American politics and IR and comparative politics, but they don't explain timing. So if we're thinking about like why the civil rights movement emerged when it did, theory helps us explain that timing. There have always been courageous people and there have always been leaders. Theory pushes us to look deeper at institutions, structures, and incentives. It asks us to move, it demands that we move beyond individual personalities and towards systematic explanations of why things occur. So, theory also kind of disciplines our thinking. Instead of relying on intuition, theory forces us to identify causes, trace change of influences, compare cases, and justify claims with evidence. It keeps us from just saying what feels right. That's why political science readings can sometimes feel dense and seemingly hard to comprehend, or slow trudging through a deeply theoretical reading. These readings are trying to build careful arguments. They're saying that if certain conditions change, other outcomes become possible. They're laying out mechanisms of why things occur when they do. And so finally, theory helps us understand the present. We don't study politics just to learn history. We study politics to understand what's happening right now. Questions like why some protests succeed while others fade, why governments sometimes repress and sometimes concede to demands, and why reform often comes during moments of crises. That aren't just historical questions, they're contemporary ones. Theory gives us tools to analyze modern politics, from elections and public policy to social movements and international conflict. So, theory is an important piece of political science, even when reading about theory can seem like a difficult, like you're struggling through heavy, dense reading, but it's helping us make sense of why the events that occurred, and why they occurred when they did. So thank you.